I pulled into my driveway after 2 weeks away, exhausted from the red-eye flight from Vancouver in a way that did not feel like ordinary tiredness anymore. Because ordinary tiredness sits in the muscles and asks only for sleep. But this was deeper. A slow gray heaviness that had worked its way into my bones, into my eyes, into the spaces behind my ribs where fear had been living for 14 days without giving me one honest hour of rest. My mother had suffered a stroke, sudden and vicious. The kind of phone call that arrives before dawn and changes the shape of the whole world before a person is fully awake. And I had been at her bedside through the worst of it, watching her mouth pull slightly to one side, watching her fingers search weakly for a cup she could not lift, listening to doctors explain probabilities in calm voices that seemed almost cruel because they carried no personal stake in the outcome. She was stable now, thank God. Stable enough that my sister in Vancouver had taken my hand that morning and told me to go home, that Margaret needed me too, that I could not split myself in two even if I wanted to. And I had nodded, packed my bag with a kind of numb mechanical obedience, and boarded the flight east with one thought beaten. In my head, the whole way across the country. Home, Margaret, light in the living room, her small smile when she saw me, her hand on my wrist when she needed to make sure I was real. My wife Margaret was 63 and had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years earlier, though for a long time I could not make myself say the word without feeling as if I had betrayed her by naming. In the beginning it was little things. Misplaced keys in the freezer, a kettle left on without water, the same question asked 3 times in one afternoon. But then the disease learned our house. It learned the corners. It learned our schedule. It crept in quietly and began loosening the screws that held her days together. Still, Margaret was Margaret. She could still laugh at stupid commercials. She still knew the Blue Jays lineup better than I did on good days. She still liked her tea in the blue mug, and hated when people spoke about her as if she had already left the room. Routine helped, familiar light helped, my voice helped. That was why 2 weeks apart had felt unbearable, not just emotionally but physically, as if every hour I spent in Vancouver had been taken out of the small remaining bank of time Margaret and I had left together. The house was dark. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. Before the smell, before the lock, before the sight that would divide my life into everything before and everything after. It was only 8 in the evening, early September, the kind of hour when the neighborhood still held a few warm rectangles of light behind curtains and kitchen windows. When people were finishing dinner or watching television or taking dogs out before bed. Margaret usually kept the living room lights on, even when she forgot what day it was. Even when she grew agitated at dusk and wandered from room to room asking where her father had gone though he had been dead for 30 years. She kept lights on. Darkness unsettled her. It made the walls look unfamiliar. It made the house feel like a place she had been dropped into by mistake. Jennifer knew that. My daughter knew that better than anyone because I had told her. Carefully, repeatedly, almost embarrassingly, before I left. I sat in the car for a few seconds after cutting the engine, one hand still on the steering wheel, my suitcase visible in the rearview mirror, and I told myself not to be dramatic. Maybe Margaret was asleep. Maybe Jennifer had taken her out. Maybe a breaker had tripped. Maybe anything except what my body already seemed to understand. I got out stiff from the flight, opened the trunk, and pulled my suitcase free. Its wheels clicked over the driveway in the quiet evening, absurdly loud, and that sound made me feel suddenly exposed, like the whole street was watching me return to a house that had stopped being mine while I was gone. I was fumbling for my keys at the front door when I heard it. At first it was faint enough that my mind refused to accept it as a real sound. A dull thump, then another, uneven but persistent, buried beneath the silence inside. I froze with the key still in my hand. The sound came again. Thump, pause, thump. It was not pipes. It was not the furnace. It was not the house settling. It had intention in it, desperation. Then under it, I heard something worse. A muffled human voice, hoarse and thin, like someone trying to call through a wall after there was almost no strength left to call with. My heart stopped. I shoved the key into the lock so hard I scraped my knuckles against the door, twisted it, and burst inside. The smell was not strong yet, not at the entrance, but something stale and sour moved through the air beneath the ordinary scent of our house, and the thumping grew clearer immediately. It was coming from below, from the basement. "Margaret," I shouted, but the sound that came back was not a word. It was a broken cry. I dropped my suitcase in the foyer and ran. The basement door was closed, And for one insane second, I reached for the knob as if it would simply open, as if the world still obeyed the laws it had obeyed when I left. It did not. A heavy-duty padlock hung from the outside of the door, looped through a metal hasp that had been screwed into the frame. It was new. It was ugly. It was the kind of thing you put on a shed or a storage unit, or a place where you wanted to make sure nobody got out. My hands became useless. I grabbed the lock, pulled, rattled it, called Margaret's name again, and the thumping on the other side became frantic. A weak, panicked pounding that vibrated through the wood into my palms. I ran to the garage so fast I nearly fell. Tools hung in their usual places, because I had always been a man who believed order could save time when time mattered. I grabbed a crowbar, came back, jammed it under the hasp, and pulled with everything I had. The first yank bent the screws. The second tore the wood around them. The third ripped the metal loose with a cracking sound, so violent it echoed through the hallway. The door swung open. The smell hit me first. Urine, sweat, human fear, something sour and trapped and old, though it could only have been 2 weeks. I flicked on the stairwell light and nearly collapsed. Margaret was at the bottom of the stairs. She was filthy, trembling, sitting half-curled against the wall as if she had been trying to climb, but no longer had the strength to make her body obey. Her nightgown was stained and torn at the hem. Her bare legs were bruised, her skin pale with a grayish cast. Her face had become sharp in 2 weeks, cheekbones too visible, lips cracked and bleeding. She looked up toward the sudden light, lifting one hand as if to shield herself from me, and in her eyes I saw terror before recognition. And that was the first wound that would never heal. My wife was afraid of me because the disease and the darkness, and whatever had been done to her, had taken even that certainty from her for a few seconds. Thomas, her voice was no more than broken air. Is that really you? I was down the stairs before I knew I had moved. I dropped beside her, gathered her into my arms, and she weighed almost nothing. Margaret had always been small, but this was different. This was absence. This was a body emptied by thirst and hunger and fear. Her hands clutched my shirt with a child's panic, and she began to shake harder as I held her. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, though my voice was shaking so badly I barely understood myself. "I'm here. I've got you. I've got you now." She smelled of the basement, of suffering, of neglect so intimate and deliberate that my mind could not accept. I carried her upstairs one step at a time, every movement careful, because I was terrified I would hurt her. Her head sagged against my shoulder. She mumbled something about being cold, then asked if Jenny was angry, then asked why the lights went away. I laid her on the couch and ran for my phone, dialing 911 with fingers that did not feel connected to my body. As I gave our address to the dispatcher, I looked around the house and saw it clearly for the first time. Furniture had been moved, not much, just enough that my eye caught the dislocation. A side table was missing from beside Margaret's chair. 2 cardboard boxes sat in the corner near the dining room, sealed with packing tape. Margaret's pill organizer was gone from the kitchen counter, the bright plastic one with morning and evening compartments that I filled every Sunday. The framed photo of us at Niagara Falls had been turned face down on the bookshelf. Small things, domestic things, but each one felt like a footprint. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They moved around Margaret with efficient gentleness, taking blood pressure, checking pulse, asking questions she could not answer. One of them, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a voice trained not to show shock, looked up at me after pressing 2 fingers to Margaret's wrist. "Sir, when did you last see your wife?" 2 weeks ago, I said. "I left her with our daughter. Jennifer was supposed to stay with her while I was in Vancouver. My mother had a stroke and My voice broke before I could finish. I heard myself say the next sentence like it belonged to someone else. "Jennifer did this." The paramedic exchanged a glance with her partner. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. They loaded Margaret onto the stretcher, wrapped her in blankets, started fluids, and I climbed into the ambulance beside her because no force on earth could have made me let go of her hand. The siren did not sound. That made it worse somehow. The city slid by outside the rear windows, indifferent and ordinary, while my wife drifted in and out beside me, whispering my name and then our daughter's and then her mother's, her mind moving through old rooms trying to find one that was safe. At St. Michael's Hospital, they admitted her immediately. Doctors used words like severe dehydration, malnutrition, exposure, early hypothermia despite it being September, skin breakdown, infection risk, trauma response. I stood in the fluorescent corridor and let the words hit me one by one, because I had no defense against them. A nurse pulled me aside while the doctors worked. She had kind eyes, and that made the question worse. "Mr. Holloway, I need to ask you something directly. Has your wife been locked in that basement for the entire 2 weeks you were away?" The question should not have been possible. It should have been rejected by the world as too monstrous to ask in a hospital hallway. 14 days. My Margaret trapped in cold darkness, confused, thirsty, calling for me. Maybe calling for Jennifer too. Because even then, even betrayed, she would have wanted the child she remembered. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just found her like that." An hour later, a police officer arrived, then another. The second one introduced himself as Detective Aaron Morrison, from the Toronto Police Service Elder Abuse Unit. I remember noticing the words Elder Abuse Unit with a strange detachment, as if my mind needed to pause on the fact that such a unit existed, that there were enough people like Margaret, enough families like mine, to require specialists. I sat in the hospital waiting room with cold coffee untouched between my hands and told him everything. My name was Thomas Holloway. I was 65. Retired from civil engineering after 38 years designing roads, municipal structures, drainage systems, the practical skeletons of cities that people only notice when they fail. Margaret was 63. She had early-onset Alzheimer's, diagnosed 2 years ago, progressing slowly but clearly. She could still do most things with reminders and routine. She still knew me. She knew our daughter. She got confused, forgot where she put things, lost track of time, had bad evenings when shadows made her anxious. But she was not helpless. Not like this. Never like this. Our daughter Jennifer was 38, a CPA at a mid-sized firm downtown, polished, efficient, the kind of woman who always had a calendar app open and a second coffee in her hand. She married Kyle Morrison 3 years earlier. Kyle called himself a business consultant, though I never fully understood what he did. He spoke in phrases that sounded expensive, but did not mean much once you examine them. Cryptocurrency, NFTs, passive income streams, decentralized opportunity, arbitrage. He could talk for 20 minutes without saying anything a person could hold. I never liked him. I told myself it was because fathers rarely like sons-in-law at first, because no man seems good enough for the girl whose training wheels you once held steady. But the truth was uglier. Kyle made me uneasy, because he looked at people as if they were doors he might open. 2 weeks earlier, my sister called from Vancouver at 3 in the morning. My mother had collapsed, a stroke. Bad. I booked the first flight out. Jennifer volunteered immediately to stay with Margaret. She had come over within 2 hours, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, carrying a tote bag and speaking with brisk competence. "Dad, don't worry about a thing," she said, putting both hands on my shoulders while Margaret sat at the kitchen table asking why I had packed a suitcase. "I'll take care of Mom. You focus on Grandma. I know her routines. I know the medications. I know the sundoning. I've got this." I wanted to believe her, so I did. That is one of the cruelest things about trust. It makes fools of us not because we are stupid, but because love needs shortcuts or it cannot function. I called every day from Vancouver for the first week. Jennifer answered, "Mom's fine, Dad. We're watching her favorite shows. I made soup. She ate half a bowl. She's napping now. Don't worry." During the second week, the calls went to voicemail. Then texts came instead. "Sorry, busy with Mom. She's good. Call you later." But later never came. Margaret's own phone went straight to voicemail. I told myself the battery died. I told myself Jennifer was overwhelmed. I told myself my mother needed me and my daughter had Margaret under control. Detective Morrison wrote all this down. He was careful not to react too much, but I could see his jaw tightening. Then he asked the question that changed the shape of the investigation. "Mr. Holloway, during those 2 weeks, did you give your daughter power of attorney over your wife's affairs?" "No, absolutely not." "Did your wife sign any documents that you're aware of?" "No, not that I know of." "Why?" He closed his notebook slowly. "We'll need to investigate further, but this appears to be more than neglect. Margaret stayed in the hospital for 3 days. They rehydrated her. They treated her for exposure and malnutrition. They ran tests and gave me numbers and charts and cautious reassurances that her body had survived. Her mind was harder to measure. She kept asking where Jennifer was. "Where's Jenny?" she asked on the second morning, blinking up at me from the hospital bed. "She was just here. She was making me lunch." "No, sweetheart," I said, because I could not lie fast enough to comfort her and could not tell the truth without destroying something fragile inside her. "Not right now." "Did I upset her?" "No." "Then why did she close the door?" I had no answer. I held her hand until she slept. While Margaret was asleep that day, I went home. I told myself I needed clothes for her, toiletries, the blue cardigan she liked because the hospital was cold. The truth was I needed to stand inside that house and see it. I needed to understand how evil could move through rooms I had painted, cleaned, renovated, and called safe. The basement was worse in daylight. The door frame splintered from where I had torn away the lock. At the bottom of the stairs, the concrete floor held the faint, dark stain where Margaret had been sitting. In the corner was a bucket, and I stood looking at it for a long time before my mind allowed me to understand. A thin blanket lay on the floor. No pillow, no water bottles, no food wrappers. The light bulb had been removed from the socket. That detail nearly broke me. Not burned out, removed. Someone had reached up and twisted it out, so Margaret would remain in darkness. My wife, who loved warm lamps and evening light and had grown frightened of shadows, had been locked in a basement with no light because darkness helped keep her quiet. Upstairs, I found Jennifer's laptop on the kitchen table. It should not have been there. Jennifer was meticulous with devices. She wiped screens with microfiber cloths, locked everything, never left her purse open. But the laptop was there, half closed, charger still plugged in, and when I lifted the screen, the password field was already bypassed. It woke to a desktop full of folders. I am not proud of what I did next. I can say the police would have found it. I can say any husband would have done the same after finding his wife in the basement. I can say I was in shock. All of that is true. It does not change the fact that I sat at my kitchen table and opened my daughter's files with hands that shook so badly the cursor jumped. What I found was not chaos. It was order. That was what made it monstrous. There were scanned documents in neat folders, power of attorney papers with Margaret's signature, real estate documents, bank statements, a folder labeled Investment Opportunity, Kyle's Fund, another labeled Lisbon, another labeled Mom Medical. I clicked until my stomach turned cold. The first week I was gone, Jennifer had taken Margaret to a lawyer's office in Scarborough. Not our family lawyer, not anyone who knew us, but a notary whose website looked like it had been built in one afternoon, and whose office hours included evenings by appointment. She had Margaret sign power of attorney documents. The signature was shaky but recognizable, that looping M Margaret still made when prompted, though the disease had begun making her handwriting uncertain. There were scanned copies of identification. There was a note from the notary stating that Margaret appeared lucid and understood the nature of the documents she was signing. I read that sentence several times. Appeared lucid, understood. My wife had been led somewhere by her daughter and told it was paperwork for Dad, or paperwork for the bank, or paperwork because Thomas is away and we have to help him. And because she trusted Jennifer, because mothers trust daughters long after daughters stop deserving it, she had signed. With that POA, Jennifer accessed our accounts, $75,000 withdrawn from savings, money Margaret and I had set aside for her future care as the Alzheimer's progressed, money saved from decades of careful spending, delayed vacations, old cars driven longer than we wanted, small sacrifices made because disease is expensive and dignity costs money. Jennifer also took out a home equity line of credit against our house for $100,000. We had owned our little Leslieville home outright for 20 years. Mortgage-free, secure, a paid-off house was my final pride as a husband. It meant no matter how bad the medical costs became, Margaret had a roof. Now, because of signatures gathered in confusion, we owed the bank $100,000. All of it, $175,000, had been transferred to Thornhill Capital Management. I searched the name. 3 clicks later, the screen showed a numbered corporation registered 6 months earlier. Director Kyle Morrison, business purpose, cryptocurrency investment, and blockchain consulting. I sat back in the chair and heard a sound come out of my mouth that did not feel human. Then I found the texts. Kyle, she keeps crying for your dad. This isn't going to work. Jennifer, she'll forget. Give it another day. The confusion helps. Kyle, what if someone checks on her? Jennifer, who? Dad's in Vancouver. Mom's friends haven't visited in months because of her condition. We're fine. Kyle, she needs water at least. Jennifer, I left some earlier. Stop panicking. Kyle, this is getting ugly. Jennifer, it was always ugly. We just finally stopped pretending. I stared at those lines until the letters blurred. She'll forget. The confusion helps. That was my daughter, writing about her mother in the basement. Not under pressure, not confused, not manipulated in some vague emotional sense. Calculating, cold, using Margaret's disease as a tool. I called Detective Morrison. My voice was not my own when I spoke. He came within 30 minutes with 2 officers. I showed them everything. The laptop, the documents, the texts, the basement, the missing light bulb, the bucket. One officer photographed the scratches on the inside of the basement door, where Margaret had clawed at the wood. I had not noticed them before. 4 curved sets of shallow marks near the lower panel. Fingernails. My knees went weak when I saw them. This is elder abuse, Detective Morrison said carefully, though the carefulness seemed to cost him something. Financial exploitation and unlawful confinement. We'll need your wife's testimony when she's able, but there's enough here to proceed. Where's my daughter? I asked. He looked at me for a moment before answering. We don't know yet. Jennifer and Kyle's condo in Liberty Village was nearly empty when officers arrived. Furniture gone, closets cleaned out, drawers open, but in the trash, because arrogance makes people sloppy, officers found bank statements, one-way tickets to Portugal with a stop in London, and a printed email from a Lisbon property management company confirming a 6-month rental. The plan was simple. Take the money, leave the country, let Margaret die perhaps, or let someone find her too late. Return never. Explain nothing. My mother's recovery had been faster than expected. I had come home 3 days earlier than originally planned. Detective Morrison said the sentence gently, because he knew what it would do to me. Your early return saved your wife's life. People use the word saved as if it contains relief. It did not. It contained a second horror. If my mother had needed me longer, if my flight had been delayed, if I had stopped for dinner before coming home, if I had listened to the exhaustion in my body and gone to a hotel near the airport for one night, Margaret might have died in the basement of our home while our daughter boarded a plane with our money. The manhunt lasted 6 days. Their faces appeared on the news. Daughter and son-in-law wanted in elder abuse investigation. I stopped answering the phone. Reporters called. Neighbors rang the bell. Former colleagues left voicemails. I did not care. My world had shrunk to Margaret's hospital room and the chair beside her bed. She was released on day 4, physically weak but alive. Mentally, she moved in loops. She asked if Jennifer was coming for dinner. She asked if she had done something wrong. She asked once, very softly, if the basement was still there. Yes, I said, because the truth came before comfort now in ways I hated. But you're not going back down there. Jenny locked it, she whispered. I closed my eyes. I know. Was she scared too? That was Margaret, even after what had been done to her. Some part of her still tried to imagine fear in the person who hurt her, because fear was easier to understand than cruelty. On day 6, Jennifer and Kyle were arrested at Pearson Airport trying to board a flight to London, the first stop before Portugal. Border Services flagged them. Detective Morrison called me within the hour. We've got them, he said. They're in custody. I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction. Just a hollow, windless emptiness where fatherhood had been. The charges came down hard. Elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, unlawful confinement, fraud over $5,000, forgery related to the POA documents. Kyle faced additional charges when Thornhill Capital Management turned out to be exactly what it looked like. A Ponzi scheme dressed in crypto language, and sold to people too trusting or too desperate to understand what they were signing. He had taken money from at least 30 investors, many elderly or vulnerable, promising 40% returns on cryptocurrency trades that did not exist. He shuffled money from new investors to old ones, skimmed the rest, and called it innovation. Crown attorney assigned to the case was Patricia Chen, a sharp woman with short hair, precise suits, and a voice that never rose because it did not need to. She met me 1 week after the arrests in a conference room, where everything smelled faintly of paper and burnt coffee. Mr. Holloway, she said, folding her hands on a file thick enough to bruise a table. This is one of the most egregious elder abuse cases I've seen. The premeditation, the exploitation of your wife's cognitive condition, the confinement, the financial devastation, all of it is serious. We are pushing for maximum sentences. How long, I asked. 8 to 12 years for Jennifer, 10 to 15 for Kyle, depending on how the fraud charges consolidate. And the money. There it was, the practical question that felt indecent beside the larger horror, but could not be ignored because care costs, money, and Margaret's future had been stolen with numbers and signatures. Patricia's expression softened, and I disliked her for that softness because it prepared me for loss. Kyle's fund is bankrupt. The money is gone. Some spent, some moved offshore, some paid to earlier investors. We'll pursue restitution orders, but I need you to be realistic about recovery. Gone, savings gone, home equity gone, security gone. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me since the laptop. Did she know? Jennifer, did she know what Kyle was doing was fraud? Patricia opened the evidence file. Based on emails and texts we recovered, yes. She helped recruit investors. 2 of them were from her accounting firm. She created false financial statements for the fund. She was not merely aware. She was an active participant. My daughter was not a victim of her husband. She was not swept along by a charming criminal. She had used her education, her license, her mother's illness, her father's absence, and the trust of every person around her as tool. The bail hearing was the first time I saw Jennifer after the arrest. She wore an orange jumpsuit. Her hair, usually sleek and controlled, was pulled back without care. She looked smaller than I remembered, and somehow more like the child she had been. And for one terrible second my body betrayed me. It wanted to go to her. It remembered scraped knees, school concerts, the first time she said daddy with both arms in the air. Then she looked toward me and mouthed, "Dad, please." And all I saw was Margaret at the bottom of the stairs. Her lawyer argued for release. No criminal record, ties to the community, low flight risk. Patricia Chen stood and said Portugal. One-way tickets, emptied condo, vulnerable victim, destruction of evidence, danger to Margaret. The judge denied bail. Jennifer cried. Kyle stared at the floor. I stood up and walked out before the hearing ended because I did not trust my face to remain human. The criminal case moved forward, but I could not leave everything to the Crown. I hired Christopher Walsh, an elder law and estate litigation attorney with a calm manner that made him seem almost priestly, until he began discussing legal strategy. He told me to sue, financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, lock down future assets, place liens wherever possible. Even if they had nothing now, they might one day inherit, earn, own. Some judgments are less about collection than permanence. We filed 2 weeks later. Jennifer Holloway and Kyle Morrison, defendants. Damages, $175,000 in stolen. Funds plus $200,000 for Margaret's suffering. Numbers on a page trying and failing to measure darkness. I also contacted the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. Jennifer had used her CPA credentials to make Kyle's scheme look legitimate. People trusted her because those letters after her name meant competence, ethics, restraint. She had traded on that trust. I filed a formal complaint. Within a month, her license was suspended, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. If convicted, she would be permanently barred from the profession. That should have felt satisfying. It did not. It felt like closing a window after the house had already burned. The months that followed became a long corridor with no doors. Margaret worsened. Stress accelerates cognitive decline. Her neurologist told me, not as an excuse, not as comfort, just as fact. She stopped asking about Jennifer, which I thought would be easier. It was not. The questions had hurt, but their absence felt like another theft. Her mind had begun erasing our daughter, as if the truth was too poisonous to store. Sometimes she called me dad. Sometimes she asked when we were going home while sitting in our own living room. Sometimes she woke from naps gasping, saying she could not find the stairs. I hired a full-time caregiver named Anna because I could no longer pretend love and exhaustion were enough. Anna was gentle and patient, but even her presence felt like a receipt for what Jennifer had done. Bills came, medical costs, legal fees, payments on the home equity line we never wanted. For the first time in 20 years, our paid-off home felt fragile. I would sit at the kitchen table after Margaret slept and stare at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred, thinking of every year we had lived carefully, every repair I had done myself, every vacation deferred, every modest choice made so Margaret would have care when she needed. My daughter had collapsed all of that in less than 2 weeks. The preliminary hearing happened in January, 5 months after I found Margaret. I testified. I walked the court through the driveway, the dark house, the sound, the lock, the basement, the laptop, the transfers, the text messages. Jennifer's lawyer tried to paint her as damaged, manipulated by Kyle, desperate, emotionally strained by her mother's illness. Patricia Chen let him build the softness, and then cut through it with documents. The judge looked at Jennifer and said, Miss Holloway, you are a trained accountant. You understood exactly what you were doing. You exploited your mother's cognitive vulnerability for financial gain. There is no mitigating factor before this court that changes the seriousness of that. The case was bound over for trial. Before trial, Kyle took a deal. He would plead guilty to all charges and testify against Jennifer in exchange for a reduced sentence. Patricia called me before accepting. If he testifies, the case against Jennifer becomes nearly airtight, she said. His testimony, combined with the documentary evidence, strengthens premeditation. Will he serve time? Yes, 8 years, eligible for parole after serving 2/3, but realistically at least 5 years. And Jennifer, with Kyle's testimony, we push for 12. I thought about Margaret asking why Jenny did not call. I thought about the bucket in the basement. I thought about fingernail scratches in wood. Take the deal, I said. Kyle pleaded guilty in February. At sentencing, he read a statement about remorse. I watched his mouth move and wondered if he had rehearsed sincerity in front of a mirror. The judge sentenced him to 8 years. One down, people might say. I did not. There was no scoreboard. There was only wreckage. Jennifer's trial began in June and lasted 3 weeks. The Crown presented the POA fraud, the bank transfers, the laptop searches, the Lisbon plans, the texts, the basement video. They called Margaret to testify. That was the hardest day of my life, harder than finding her, because finding her had been pure panic. But this was controlled humiliation inside a courtroom where every person watched my diminished wife try to place memory in order while the disease kept moving the pieces. She wore a blue cardigan. Anna sat beside her until she was called. On the stand, Margaret looked frightened by the microphones. Patricia spoke gently. Mrs. Holloway, do you remember being in the basement? Margaret looked at me. Thomas was gone. Yes. Do you remember how you got there? Jenny said I needed to rest. Jennifer sat at the defense table and looked down. Did you want to be in the basement? Margaret frowned. It was dark. Could you leave? I called and called. Her fingers twisted in her lap. I was bad, maybe. No, Patricia said softly. You were not bad. Jennifer's lawyer cross-examined her and tried to use the confusion to weaken everything. Dates, times, details. Margaret got mixed up. She asked if she could go home. She asked if Jennifer was in trouble. Then Patricia played the police video of the basement, taken the day of the search warrant. The courtroom watched the dark concrete space, the bucket, the blanket, the scratches on the inside of the door. Nobody questioned memory after that. The room itself testified. Kyle took the stand next and laid out the scheme. He said Jennifer approached him with the idea that she researched POA laws, that she found the notary, that she planned around my trip, that she said Margaret's Alzheimer's would make everything easier. It was cowardly, self-serving, and devastating, because the evidence backed him up. Jennifer's laptop showed searches made weeks before my mother's stroke. Power of attorney, vulnerable parent, Ontario. Can dementia patient sign POA? Countries no extradition, Canada financial crime. How long before missing elder welfare check? The searches were little windows into a mind I no longer recognized. Jennifer took the stand in her own defense. It was a disaster. She tried to claim she had been overwhelmed, that Kyle manipulated her, that she believed the money would grow and help us later, that locking Margaret in the basement was never supposed to last, that she panicked, that she did not mean for anyone to be hurt. Patricia stood with a single printed text. Miss Holloway, you wrote, she'll forget. Give it another day, the confusion helps. You were referring to your mother. Jennifer swallowed. What were you hoping she would forget? Silence. Miss Holloway, you locked your mother in a basement without food or water for 14 days. You stole her savings, borrowed against her home, planned to flee the country, and now you want this jury to believe you never meant to hurt anyone. Jennifer cried. Maybe those tears were real. Maybe she was mourning her future, her career, the collapse of the story in which she was still a good person who had made a mistake. I did not care. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. I submitted a victim impact statement. 5 pages that took me 11 drafts because every sentence either said too much or not enough. I wrote about finding Margaret. I wrote about the money. I wrote about how our home no longer felt safe. I wrote about Alzheimer's and how fear had accelerated the theft that disease was already committing. Margaret could not submit a statement. Her neurologist wrote one instead, documenting the measurable decline after the trauma. The judge read everything, then looked at Jennifer. Miss Holloway, you are an educated, intelligent woman. You understood your mother's vulnerability, and exploited it without conscience. You betrayed her trust, your father's trust, and every standard of human decency. This court finds no meaningful mitigating factor. Jennifer looked smaller than ever. 12 years in federal prison. I exhaled. It was over, but not really. Nothing ended in that courtroom. It only became official. The civil suit settled a month later. Jennifer and Kyle were jointly liable for $375,000. They had no money. Court placed liens on future assets, wages, inheritance, anything that might someday exist. Restitution orders said they owed us $175,000 plus interest. Those papers sit in a folder in my desk. They are legally powerful and practically useless. We refinanced the home equity line into the mortgage. Mortgage payments after 20 years, without them, felt like a punishment disguised as paperwork. Margaret's care costs continued rising. Insurance covered some of it, never enough. I began meeting with memory care facilities because the disease was advancing, and Anna, kind as she was, could not be everywhere. I stood in bright, clean hallways where staff smiled gently and described safety protocols. And all I could think was that Jennifer had stolen the dignity of choosing these things slowly. She had turned every future decision into a crisis. Jennifer is at Grand Valley Institution for Women now, about an hour west of Toronto. Kyle is at Joyceville near Kingston. I have not visited either of them. I will not. People ask if I regret pursuing charges so aggressively. They ask this carefully, usually after saying they cannot imagine my pain, which is true. They cannot. They ask if 12 years is too harsh. They ask if family should sometimes handle things privately. They ask because the idea of a daughter locking her mother in a basement is too terrible. So they look for some softer version where forgiveness can still sit at the table. Here is what I tell them. Jennifer locked her confused, terrified mother in a basement for 2 weeks. She stole everything we had saved for Margaret's care. She used Alzheimer's as a weapon. She planned to flee the country and leave behind whatever body or story remained. She did this knowingly, carefully, without conscience. 12 years is not harsh. 12 years is mercy. Margaret does not understand where Jennifer is. Sometimes she still asks. Not often now. When she does, I tell her Jennifer is away for work. It is easier than explaining a truth she will not remember, but will feel each time as new pain. Last month, Margaret forgot who I was for the first time. She looked at me from her chair by the window, really looked at me with polite fear and asked who I was and what I was doing in her house. It lasted an hour, then she touched my hand and said Thomas as if returning from very far away. But it has begun. The final stage is no longer a distant shore. It is under our feet. I think about those 14 days more than I think about the money. Money can be counted. Loss cannot. Those were days Margaret and I should have had together before the disease took more of her. 14 evenings of tea. 14 mornings of reminding her gently what day it was. 14 chances to hear her laugh at a Blue Jays broadcast or complain that I folded towels wrong. Instead, she spent them in darkness, calling through a locked door while our daughter waited for confusion to do its work. That is what I cannot forgive. Justice did not restore anything. It did not give us back our savings. It did not heal Margaret's mind. It did not turn Jennifer back into the little girl who cried over a dead goldfish and asked if heaven had fish bowls. Justice only drew a line and said this happened. This was real. This was wrong. Sometimes that is all the world can offer, and sometimes it is not enough. As for me and Margaret, we are still here, still fighting, still together in the narrowing space the disease leaves us. Some mornings she knows me, some mornings she does not. Some evenings she reaches for my hand before sleep and says, "Do not leave me downstairs." And I tell her I will never leave her anywhere, though both of us know in different ways that promises are fragile things. I lock no doors inside our house now. I leave lights on in every room until dawn. The electricity bill is absurd. I pay it gladly. My daughter learned that trust can be broken so completely that love does not know where to stand afterward. I learned that family is not sacred because blood says so. It is sacred only when the people inside it choose not to destroy one another, when destruction would be profitable. Jennifer made her choice. Kyle made his. The courts made theirs. And Margaret, who deserved none of this, pays every day. That is the part left after the headlines fade, after the courtroom empties, after people stop calling to ask if you are all right. A quiet house full of light. A mortgage payment where there should have been security. A wife who sometimes trembles at the sound of a basement door. A father who no longer has a daughter. Survival is not the same as relief. Accountability is not the same as healing. We are still here, and that is more than Jennifer intended for us. But it is not victory. It is only what remains.